I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. 14 beams of light will be projected into the sky from Mount Royal tonight. This is to honor the lives of 14 women shot and killed 32 years ago today at Montreal's École Polytechnique. Federal party leaders issued statements to mark the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is asking everyone to reflect on what we can do through words and actions to end gender-based violence. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole is urging Canadians to denounce unacceptable behavior, teach children and loved ones to respect one another, and set an example. While NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says we must put a stop to men's violence against women, particularly Indigenous women, racialized women, trans women, low-income women, and disabled women. All right, well, meanwhile, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he is accepting the resignation of Dominic Barton as Canada's ambassador to China with both gratitude and respect. Mr. Barton will step down at the end of the month. This comes after 2 years in which he was praised for helping secure the release of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, but criticized for strongly pushing closer ties with Beijing. New legislation is expected to be announced in Parliament today that would remove mandatory minimum penalties for drug offenses. The Liberals tabled a bill back in February that would have allowed for greater use of conditional sentences and counseling or treatment, but it didn't pass before the federal election was called. With just 2 weeks to go before the holiday break, the Liberals also want to get their new pandemic aid bill through Parliament. But the Conservatives want it split in two, so MPs can vote separately on supports for businesses and workers. Ottawa is set to display a bit of political give and take. The federal government is planning to introduce a new pandemic aid package, but in order to ensure its speedy passage through the House of Commons, the Liberals agreed to let the Finance Committee grill Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland about the economy, the latest aid package, and the government's pandemic response overall. The Canadian military has discovered cracks in the tails of 19 of its 23 Cyclone helicopters. The Royal Canadian Air Force issued an emailed statement yesterday. It said cracks had been detected in one Sikorsky-built helicopter in BC on November 26th, and a fleet-wide inspection was started. The RCAF says the aircraft have not been grounded, and engineers from the military are working with the company to repair them. The entire fleet is overseen by 12-wing Shearwater, which is the RCAF base in the Halifax area. Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller says the government will turn over some residential school records to the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation within 30 days. In October, the Winnipeg-based centre refuted a statement by the Prime Minister that the federal government had turned over all the records in its possession. Mr. Miller says the government now believes its obligation to residential school survivors takes precedence over obligations it had to entities of the Catholic Church. Phil Fontaine, a former national chief of the Assembly of First Nations, says he believes it is the right time, with the right pope, for the Catholic Church to take the step toward reconciliation. Later this month, Mr. Fontaine will make his second trip to the Vatican to ask a pope to apologize for the Catholic Church's role in residential schools. In 2009, Mr. Fontaine was part of an Indigenous delegation that met with former Pope Benedict. The pontiff then expressed his sorrow and personal anguish over residential schools, but he never apologized. The Trans Mountain Pipeline has restarted following a 3-week precautionary shutdown during a series of storms that battered BC. The Federal Crown Corporation says the pipeline was safely restarted yesterday after all necessary assessments and repairs were completed. It says some of that work included the construction of protective earthworks. This comes after flooding exposed sections of the pipeline, which carries 300,000 barrels per day of petroleum products from Alberta to BC. Trans Mountain says it is monitoring the pipeline on the ground, by air, and through its control center after the restart. Well, today marks the 104th anniversary of the Halifax explosion. The explosion occurred on December 6th, 1917, after the French munitions ship Mont Blanc and the Norwegian relief ship IMO collided in the narrows of Halifax Harbor. More than 2,000 people were killed and another 9,000 were injured. Almost all of the city's north end was destroyed, and buildings throughout Halifax and Dartmouth were significantly damaged. All right, we'll be right back after the break. Canada's innovation minister said this week that the biomanufacturing sector has rebounded beyond his expectations. But are there enough workers in the sector? To take a look at the bioeconomy and the labor market, we spoke with Rob Henderson, president and CEO of BioTalent Canada. Canada's innovation minister says this country's biomanufacturing sector has rebounded beyond his expectations in recent months. The country's $173 million investment in a plant-based vaccine made by Quebec company Medicago is likely to come to fruition within weeks. This with the company announcing clinical results today showing 75% efficacy against the Delta variant of the virus. Several other drug companies have announced plans to produce their vaccine products in Canada. This while Merck plans to produce its COVID-19 antiviral treatment in Whitby, Ontario. Well, joining us now to discuss the report released today from BioTalent Canada, titled Close Up on the Bioeconomy, is Mr. Rob Henderson, President and CEO of BioTalent Canada. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks very much. Good to be here.
So firstly, can you describe what the bioeconomy is for our viewers?
Sure. The bioeconomy is essentially the biotechnology industry. So it's associated with the invention, the development and production of bio-based products, production processes, or intellectual property. It's divided into primarily 4 subsectors, and that's biohealth or the life sciences, agribio, biofuels or bioenergy rather, and bioindustrial, which is things like bioadhesives, wood pellets, etc.
Sounds like a wide scope of industries there, sir. So what is the status of the bioeconomy across Canada?
Well, the bioeconomy, to many people's surprise, the bioeconomy in Canada has about 12,000 companies, primarily small and medium-sized enterprises of less than 50 people. So it's not all the big pharmaceutical firms that people think about. And we have over 200,000 Canadians employed in those 12,000 companies.
All right, sir. Well, going to your report here, it really highlighted some of the gaps that were exposed by the pandemic. So would you be able to touch on that?
Yeah, in terms of the study covered everything from just prior to the pandemic and during the pandemic. And it's exposed that we are going to be requiring 65,000 additional workers by the year 2029. And so this is going to be a really big issue in terms of this. Now, the fact that the bioeconomy is booming is good news to all of us, as well as the fact that we even have our own domestic vaccine production, as your report indicated. But at the same time, to ensure that it keeps firing on all economic thrusters, we're going to have to get a lot better at recruiting and retaining the best and the brightest to fill some of those 65,000 jobs.
And taking all of this into consideration, as these companies we mentioned are looking to produce vaccines in Canada, what is your outlook for Canadian bioeconomy in both the short and long term?
Well, we've been able to sort of set 2 talent benchmarks, both in 2024 and 2029. We're confident in the bioeconomies and the industry's willingness to adapt, but we're going to have to get a lot better at HR, because right now, not only are those 65,000 jobs the way the industry is now, but if we're going to be trying to get vaccine manufacturing to return to Canada, there's going to be even more of those the talent that's going to be required. So a lot of the people that are running some of those 12,000 small and medium-sized enterprises, as I mentioned, are going to have to get a lot better in human resources, which a lot of them have never even studied, let alone have any expertise in.
And it's interesting that your report looks at specific provinces as well. So how have the bioeconomy labor markets been reacting in the main regions within Canada?
The main regions, what's surprising in our study is the main regions pretty much are monochromatic. They've been affected almost the exact same way, especially in the 3 major clusters, and that's in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. They're coming up with the same kind of skills gaps that are going. And a lot of the skills gaps we're finding are in biomanufacturing. Across again, there's going to be 16,000 jobs that we're going to be requiring in those sectors. But also some of those industry agnostic jobs like sales, marketing, HR, accounting, all of these companies, are businesses. They generate revenue and expenditures like any other business. So a lot of those skills are going to be lacking in these companies as well. In terms of the regions, a lot of them have been, in fact, all of them have been affected pretty much equally. The one that's of note would be the Atlantic Canada. They have a double problem because not only do they have, are they growing, which is wonderful news for all the companies out there, but they have a disproportionate amount of students from the Maritimes that leave for other areas to pursue their career. And that doubly affects them in a negative way.
All right, sir, just about 40 seconds left here, but really quickly, what strategies does this report call for in order to fill these current shortages?
Well, we need to create jobs and to create work integrated learning opportunities. The best way to train upskill people very fast are in these internship and co-op positions. Second of all, we really have to get better at exploring underrepresented groups such as immigrants, Canadians with disabilities, and Indigenous Canadians. They are dismally represented within the bioeconomy, and these are readily accessible labor markets.
All right, Mr. Henderson, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thanks very much.
Stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break where we take a look at how disasters such as the devastating floods in BC can impact a person's mental health. What are some of the long-term and short-term effects of such large-scale disasters? Well, we'll find out in an interview with Dr. Carolyn McDonald Harker, an expert in the psychological and social impacts of disasters from Mount Royal University. BC residents who've been affected by the province's devastating floods are being encouraged to take care of their mental health. Caroline McDonald Harker, an expert in the psychological and social impacts of disasters on families, says her studies of extensive flooding in southern Alberta and the wildfire that devastated Fort McMurray found lasting effects. She says those included anxiety, depression, or even post-traumatic stress disorder, adding the signs that someone may be having trouble coping after disaster can include changes in appetite or sleeping patterns. To tell us more about how natural disasters can impact the mental health of those affected is Dr. Caroline McDonald Harker herself, professor in the sociology department at Mount Royal University. Dr. McDonald Harker, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Now, what do we know so far about how disasters may impact people in the long run?
What we know and what my research findings have shown is that major disasters have not only devastating impacts on physical infrastructure like homes, buildings, and wider communities, but they also have long-term mental health impacts on individuals who are both directly and indirectly impacted by disasters. And in fact, the mental health effects following disaster are so profound that they last much longer than the visible destruction caused by disaster, with some people still suffering effects even 10 years later.
Now, that's very interesting, Doctor. So we mentioned you studied the impacts of flooding and wildfires in Alberta. What did you find?
Certainly. What I found from my research is that it can take several years before people who experience a disaster even notice the mental toll it has taken on them. Oftentimes, people don't deal with some of the mental health challenges that they are experiencing. They keep putting it off, thinking that if they focus on rebuilding and getting their home back in order, then the mental health challenges will go away. But often they don't. And unfortunately, at that point, their mental health challenges have become exacerbated. And so my research has also found that strong communication, support systems, and a positive outlook were better able to help individuals cope and move forward after experiencing a disaster.
So taking all of this into consideration, how do you think the BC flooding is likely to impact the mental health of people in the region?
Based on my research on the 2013 Alberta flood and the 2016 Fort McMurray wildfire, it's highly likely that individuals will experience either short-term or long-term mental health challenges. Disasters are stressful. They are traumatic experiences, and there are specific populations that are more vulnerable to the effects of disasters, including women, children and youth, immigrant populations. And so it's crucial that mental health supports, resources, services, and other supports are accessible to individuals, not only during disasters, but also in the post-disaster context.
All right, doctor. So how can someone identify if they or a loved one has been mentally affected by a disaster?
It's really important to notice if one's behavior has changed. So, are people sleeping more or less? Are they eating more or less? Are they more irritable? Are they utilizing substances as a way to cope? So certainly important to pay attention to how you're reacting. And of course, experiencing stress is very normal in the immediate aftermath of a disaster. But if it ends up being prolonged, then that's when individuals really need to pay attention and reach out for some of those formalized supports. And I know that that's easier said than done. A lot of people are reluctant to access formalized supports. And so my recommendation is always that they reach out to their own immediate network, that they are open and honest with people in their environment, and they talk with them about the challenges that they are facing.
And we know BC is now implementing recovery efforts following this flooding. So is there anything that government officials can do to tackle this issue?
Absolutely. It's essential that governments, whether that be at the federal, provincial, or municipal level, become better prepared for disasters. We know that disasters are occurring at increased frequency and they're likely to continue to occur. Therefore, it is crucial that government bodies engage in disaster mitigation efforts, that they develop disaster relief programs, and that they help residents better understand disaster risk and preparedness so that individuals are better prepared the next time they face a disaster.
30 seconds left here, Doctor, but what are you keeping your eyes out for as BC is recovering from all of this?
Absolutely. Certainly, there is a lot of emphasis on the physical rebuilding. However, it's important that mental health supports are provided to individuals at the same time concurrently, as opposed to waiting months or years later, because individuals do need those immediate supports.
All right, Dr. McDonald-Harker, thank you so much for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back with stories from around the world after the break. The WHO urged against vaccine hoarding. The leader of the Africa CDC warned that forced vaccine mandates may be needed, and an independent group found the Chinese government committed genocide against the Uyghur people. These stories and more when we return. The World Health Organization is worried that rich countries spooked by the Omicron variant could start hoarding COVID-19 vaccines. Its expert panel on vaccination is again urging governments to stop the widespread use of boosters. This so that they can send doses to low-income countries where people still haven't had their first shots. But the WHO says everyone should follow the policies of their governments, noting that declining a booster shot won't free that dose up to get shipped to another country. The director of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says African governments might have to resort to COVID-19 vaccine mandates. This if their citizens don't hurry to get the increasingly available doses. The warning by John Nkegasong to reporters that governments will not have a choice came as the flow of doses to Africa's 54 countries grows. But vaccine hesitancy and the short shelf life of some donations create new pressures to get doses into arms. Africa remains the world's least vaccinated region against COVID-19, with less than 8% of its population fully jabbed. An independent group of British lawyers, academics, and business people has concluded China's alleged rights abuses against the Uyghur people constitute as genocide and crimes against humanity. The Uyghur Tribunal doesn't have any government backing or powers to sanction or punish China, but organizers hope their evidence will compel international action to tackle alleged abuses against the largely Muslim ethnic group. A Chinese foreign ministry spokesman says, quote, the so-called forced labor and genocide in Xinjiang are entirely vicious rumors. A new report says that technology used to combat COVID-19 may threaten to make surveillance monitoring more widely accepted. The study was by nonprofit research group Algorithm Watch. The group said on Thursday that the health surveillance technologies many countries deployed were often adopted without enough transparency, safeguards, or democratic debate. While acknowledging the technology played a role in saving some lives, it says it is worried about how the pandemic has been used to entrench and normalize surveillance in an increasing number of daily activities. U.S. President Joe Biden says this is a moment when a profound diminishment of freedoms is trending around the globe. At the opening of the first White House Summit for Democracy, Mr. Biden sounded the alarm about a global slide for democratic institutions. He is calling on fellow world leaders to redouble their efforts to bolster democracies. A Global Rights Index report released yesterday found 13 countries saw their civic freedoms downgraded this year from 2020. And the Hong Kong crackdown continues with the conviction of tycoon and prominent pro-democracy activist Jimmy Lai and two others. They had been charged for their roles in last year's banned Tiananmen Candlelight Vigil, which is part of Beijing's tightening political control on Hong Kong. Thursday's convictions were for either taking part in or inciting others to join the vigil in 2020. This was during which thousands of people gathered to hold the vigil despite police warnings. Burkina Faso's prime minister has been fired amid escalating jihadi violence that's killed thousands and displaced more than 1 million people. President Roch Marc Christian Caboret sacked his prime minister amid weeks of anti-government protests. In these demonstrations, people have criticized the government's inability to stem extremist attacks by al-Qaeda and the Islamic State across the West African nation. Russia's military has warned the Ukrainian government against trying to settle a separatist conflict in eastern Ukraine with force. General Valery Gerasimov, chief of the Russian General Staff, called media reports about Russia allegedly preparing an attack on Ukraine a lie. He said Thursday that Ukraine is to blame for escalating tensions in its war-torn eastern industrial heartland by deploying new weapons there. The general's statement adds to the recent tensions sparked by a Russian troop buildup near the Ukrainian border. New Zealand plans to pass a law next year that includes a lifetime ban on smoking for anyone 14 or younger. The law sets a goal of having fewer than 5% of New Zealanders smoking by 2025. This by raising the minimum age to buy cigarettes year after year. In theory, 65 years after the law takes effect, a person could still buy cigarettes, but only if they could prove that they were at least 80 years old. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news from this past week. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates. Take care, Canada. Have a great weekend.